All right, hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Jess Robinson, and I'm the Education Program Manager for the Savannah Institute. And for those of you who are new, the Savannah Institute is a nonprofit organization that works in collaboration with farmers and scientists to develop perennial food and fodder crops with diverse, multifunctional systems grounded in ecology and inspired by the Savannah Institute, Savannah Biome. So I'm pleased and very excited to introduce Hannah. Hannah founded Humble Hands Harvest in 2013 as a vegetable farm and has diversified it to include sheep, pastured pigs, and perennial nuts. She uses her location from the farm to advocate for more resilient and regenerative land use throughout the Midwest. So in this talk, Relying on Each Other, Cooperative Land Access and Management, she's going to talk about her story of land access and the work her own cooperative structure of her farm.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. My talk is about relying on each other. It's not about agroforestry technique, but I think that kind of the social dimension of accessing farmland and living in neighborhoods with other people are really important aspects to having kind of a successful farm. So I'm here tonight to share my story about accessing land and some thoughts that I have for going into the future and for kind of extrapolating community-based models of land access. So I'm a big picture person. So I'll start by kind of going into the big picture. This is a picture of my farm as it right after we cover cropped the vegetable field for the first time. It dumped about 11 inches of rain in one night, and so I got to learn firsthand about kind of the gullies that would be created on my farm. But the thing that I think about is climate change is a huge deal that is terrifying and threatening our communities and our lives. And yeah, I feel like in the Midwest, we're kind of uniquely in a place that doesn't seem like it's going to be hit as bad as some other places in the world by climate change. And that kind of is an opportunity to figure out how to be resilient and figure out how to kind of develop systems that care for a lot of people and a lot of soil as we move forward. But right now, we're not doing that. Soil is eroding, and rural communities are eroding. People are leaving and not finding opportunity, not finding a way to kind of be engaged in rural places, and so are leaving. And a big part in my sense of things, a big part of why people are leaving rural communities is because the land is being kind of grabbed up by people who already have land, by corporations and people who already have land. And so that, yeah, if you don't have access to a lot of capital already, it's really hard to access land. And the income that a person can get from farming land, no matter what kind of farming really, doesn't make up for the cost of the land itself. So I think these are really huge problems. And so searching for solutions, I think the two main things that we need to work on are to create resilient communities and to regenerate land. And regenerating land is kind of this technical process that we need to re-skill ourselves in. You know, planting perennial crops, using ruminants to to graze the land and kind of return carbon cycles and nutrient cycles. And getting more farmers on the land is a big part of that. But in order to get more farmers on the land, we need to create communities that can hold them, that can support them, and systems, policies that can also support them. And yeah, the process of creating resilient communities is so multifaceted, from like figuring out transportation and energy systems to figuring out local food systems, and then also just the basics of like knowing the people who live around us and knowing what they need and knowing how we can care for each other. So those are the big things that I think about when I'm thinking about land access. So the story of my particular land is this piece of land that you see on the screen was a 22-acre piece that was going up for auction. And the family that had owned it for many years and had rented it to a corn farmer retired and moved to town, and they are putting it up for auction. And there was a concern in the neighborhood that if the land were to go to auction, it would be bought by a hog confinement operator. And so that felt like pretty important to the quality of life of the neighbors to not have a hog confinement or CAFO manure in their neighborhood. And so a neighbor kind of got a bunch of people to get together and kind of throw in their kind of extra money to purchase shares in an LLC that bought the land. So it's called Hidden Falls Land LLC, and shares were kind of worth half an acre, so $27.50. And there were 44 shares, and that group of shareholders put the land into hay. And that was in 2014, and I had already started my farm, Humble Hands Harvest, on rented land, and I had $5,500 in my savings account, so I started buying in. And from that point on, I was like, this is where I'm going to farm. So I knew that, and no one else knew that, and it seemed like people needed a lot of convincing for me to be able to buy the land. But it ended up happening, and so this next slide here is the like numbers slide. So some people will be interested in this and some people won't, but I'm going to go through it. So I started my farm business in 2013 on rented land, and I rented for 4 seasons, 2013 through 2016. The Hidden Falls land was kind of available starting in 2017. That's when the contract with the hay renter was kind of set to renew. And so I was able to buy 8 acres of the LLC by kind of amalgamating some different things. So I was able to purchase 5 shares. 3 shareholders of the LLC gave me their shares. And then I was able to borrow money from a relative to buy 10 shares at a discount. So then I had 18 shares, and so I traded 16 of those in to be able to kind of chunk off an 8-acre piece from the 22 acres. The intention of the LLC is that eventually my farm will buy all of that land. But in order to start farming there and to put in the infrastructure that was necessary, I needed to own some of it. So in 2017, we had to start farming there. I will talk soon about my farming relationship with my co-farmer, so that's what when I'm saying we, I mean me and Emily. I'll talk more about that later. But I decided, okay, I'm going big. I'm like buying this land. I need to put in a well. I need to put in all kinds of infrastructure in order to have a vegetable farm that functions. And so I'm going to ask my community for help with that. And we threw a party in Decorah, and we also put a GoFundMe website up. And so for a couple months, I was just kind of in the mode of saying, yes, I will accept your money. I have this vision, and it'll be put to good use. So we ended up raising probably $20,000 from crowdfunding. The well cost $17,500 to get electricity that would pump the well and power the farm. Cost about $9,000 in the end. A deer fence cost $5,500. The greenhouse cost $8,000. And then, so for a vegetable farm, the like essential things are a greenhouse, water, and cooling. And luckily, Emily, my co-farmer, her dad had just retired and had this giant van that we were able to put a CoolBot cooler in, which was great. So I should mention that like I have a lot of listing of my savings, and the reason that I had so much money in that particular year was that my dad had died the year before, and his collection was being sold off, his record collection. He was a Wagner scholar. And so, so some of that money is kind of inherited wealth, one might say. And so my mom kept sending me checks from selling his collection off, and kept thinking, I feel so glad that you know, his passion can now fuel your passion, can build a well, which was really nice. And then finally in 2018, this year, we put in a movable high tunnel with an EQIP grant. We put up a pole building so that we can store hay and keep our vehicles like safe and all of that, and wash vegetables in there in the summer. And then I started the perennial part, and the reason I'm part of the Savannah Institute is I'm planting a bunch of nut trees on the pasture. This year I asked for sponsorships for those nut trees, and I was able to get $1,000 of people sponsoring at $20 a tree. And then I put in plenty as well to get those trees in the ground. So those are chestnuts and hazelnuts and hickory pecan hybrids, which is kind of fun. So all that said, the next big thing is a house with a root cellar. And the next like medium thing is a set of solar panels to kind of net meter with the grid. So yeah, the next thing that I want to talk about is being a worker-owned cooperative. That's a picture of me and Emily at our fundraising party. But Emily happens to be my second cousin. She's about 5 years younger than me, and we reconnected when she moved to Decorah in 2016. So right before we kind of went in together in 2017. She was working on a different vegetable farm and was a total catch as a farm business partner. So I snagged her up. But the issue was I had kind of more money than she did. 5 years makes a big difference. And also I had been farming longer than she had, and so people, when we started working together, were like, oh, so Hannah has a helper now, or Hannah has Hannah has an employee. But the fact is that we went into business as partners. I wanted someone to share the risk with me. I was pretty tired of doing it all by myself and taking it all on myself. So the deal with a worker-owned cooperative, we really wanted to be able to structure the business so that we could work kind of equal numbers of hours and make an equal income from the farm, which is a lower income than either of us would make if we were being paid hourly. But it's fair for us. And then we get equal decision-making power. And we use capital accounts to be able to keep track of kind of what each of us contribute to the farm in terms of finances. But those don't actually have any relevance unless except in the kind of moment that one of us might want to leave, or we'd sell the farm or something like that. So that was that feels valuable and important. Like, our work is the thing that's relevant and not our access to capital. Even though access to capital is hugely important, that's not what we're going to base our value to the farm on. So our business structure is an LLC. We're not incorporated as a cooperative because I think you need 5 members in order to be a cooperative in Iowa, at least. So we're just an LLC, but we have bylaws that structure us as a cooperative, and they're actually based on some cartoon bylaws written by Co-operative LLC, which is a popsicle making cooperative out of California, which is totally great. And those bylaws were totally comprehensible and really, really valuable for us to use. And the final thing that I want to say is, because we had a whole bunch of gifts to get started, we had that $20,000 worth of gifts, and also people had gifted me shares in the LLC to help me access that land. It was really important to me to be able to acknowledge that capital that the community had invested in this farm in a kind of specific way in our bylaws. So what we did was we gave what we call the commons one of the capital accounts. So there are 2 of us, and we each have a capital account, and then there's a third capital account called the commons. And so, for example, when we make a profit in the year, our capital accounts, the 3 of them, all increased by a third of that profit. So the idea, hopefully, is that over time the commons can own perhaps more of the farm than either Emily or I, so that the next farmers on the land will be able to buy into the cooperative and won't have to buy the entire farm, because that commons is kind of passing on as a gift. I'm happy to talk about that more later if it's confusing, but I'm really excited about it, and I feel like it's a pretty powerful idea. So the one fun thing that I wanted to mention that we did this year for the first time was we hosted a queer farmer convergence on the farm in this fall. It was an incredibly rainy weekend, We had about 30 people show up, 35 maybe, to talk about farming and queerness, or really to talk about justice on the land from our perspectives as queer agriculturalists. So that was really fun to do. It was so rewarding to get all these different people to come and spend some 48 hours with each other, get rained on a whole lot, be really cold, but like have a ton of fun. And so we're going to have that again this next year. So all of your queer farmer friends, send them our way. I should add for everyone's knowledge that I am queer and Emily is not, but she's as excited as I am about calling ourselves the queerest farm around, which is very fun. So the last thing that I want to talk about is just kind of a recap. The way that we access land and that we are structuring ourselves are both pretty unconventional, but I think they're both really needed right now. We need to figure out a way to get more people on the land working, growing real food for our communities, and kind of provisioning ourselves for a future that's resilient, that has perennial crops, for example, that can continue to produce without tilling and all of that. And then a really important and big thing for me is that there's kind of people with financial means tend to be an older generation. And there are also people in my generation who have vision, who have skills, who have follow through, but who don't have the financial means to be able to enact something. And I think it's really important to bring those two groups of people together instead of complaining about each other, which is easy to do, to figure out how to use that power that the money has and the power that the people have, and to like make sure they're working together. So that's kind of the beauty of my situation, is that there are some people with enough money to buy a share or two of this LLC land to kind of hold it and then be able to sell it at cost to us over time. But they wouldn't have sold it to just anyone, right? They had the trust that they had was really important. So I had been in the community for probably 6 years by the time I bought the land. I'd been going to church with a number of people. Yeah, very involved in the community, and I think that's kind of the key to why I was able to access land. So yeah, I think my biggest piece of advice is to just like settle down somewhere and insist that this is where you belong, and eventually the people around you will believe that. I wanted to mention the concept of local impact investment, which means investing locally and not in the stock market. A lot of people are thinking about using their retirement accounts. I don't have one of these, so I don't know that much about it, but IRAs and 401ks can be self-directed so that you can invest in things like the mortgage on a house or on a piece of land, as long as it's not your house or your piece of land. You can invest your retirement money in kind of land and kind of local things, which is really exciting, because if you think about the amount of money that is kind of in people's retirement accounts in kind of the stock market that is hard to know what's being done with that money, and it's certainly not a local or like rural quality of life thing, whatever's being done with that. And so being able to take money out, even just some of a retirement account out and put it into a local community can work wonders. I'm really hopeful about that for the future. And finally, the thing that I deal with a lot is when I ask for money, sometimes people think that I'm asking for charity, but that's not what I'm asking for. I'm asking for kind of collaboration in a future. So yeah, as with that Commons capital account that we have, that money that people are giving isn't going to me. It's going to this farm that will last beyond me, that is built, structured to last beyond me, and that hopefully can feed the future. So yeah, that's my presentation, and I'm excited to answer questions.
I'm going to go ahead and open up the Q&A, and if you guys have questions, go ahead and post it in the chat box. Also, so there's two different ways we can do this. So I've started a Q&A session, so you can either decide to just speak into a mic and have your question queued, or you can post in the question box, and I'll give everyone a couple minutes to think of questions, and I also have a couple questions that I want to ask. Okay, while everyone's thinking of their question, Ken, I was curious. I want to know more about the Commons and how that all works. You mentioned it briefly when you said you wanted to talk more about it, so I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. Yeah, so actually, to kind of back up a little bit, the idea of the Commons has been kind of present in my mind for a long time. The idea that, like, the land around us really shouldn't be owned privately. Shouldn't be. Who knows what I mean by that? But you know, the land was stolen from the indigenous people, and then it was kind of parceled out, and now with kind of our individualist American mentality, like everyone can do whatever they want with their land because it's theirs. And that's destroying us. That's why hog confinements exist in our, schools near me have had to shut down because of hog confinement pollution. Yeah, anyway, I think of land that in the long view, we need to figure out ways for it to become a commons, become something that's kind of accessible to all, and also that everybody is responsible for. And then a really fascinating thing, I was in a workshop with Autumn Brown, who is one of the sisters that is on the How to Survive the End of the World podcast. And someone asked her about reparations, like what does reparations look like? And which is a huge question. But she said, she said some people are talking about putting more things into the commons, into kind of equally accessible places, is a step toward reparations. So that's also a reason that I like to think about the commons, is like taking steps toward opening access is the same as taking steps toward repairing harm that's been done. So the idea with the commons in our farm is that if I leave the farm and Emily stays, for example, I get paid back for my part that I've put in personally, but the commons part stays with the farm. And if Emily and I both leave, that commons part stays with the farm. So we're not going to charge a price for the farm as long as people are going to continue to farm it in a regenerative way. We wouldn't charge a price for the farm that includes that gift that we've been given in it, if that makes sense. So.
All right, sweet. Yes, I agree with all of those things. That was beautiful. Thank you. And I have one more question. We don't have any questions from anyone yet. And that is, do you have people you know that you're working with that are also kind of trying to get this cooperative land management setup going, and what have they learned, or any lessons that you've learned from other people as well, having already set this up, or changes that you want to make in the future?
Totally. Well, yeah, obviously we're very early in our farm. Like we've farmed together for 2 years. So we're still figuring out what all is necessary, and what all we want to be able to do and not do and whatever. There is a farm that we kind of provided our bylaws to them. I think there are about 5 of them farming together near Iowa City, and so they're basically, every time I see them at a conference or whatever, they're like, "Oh man, your bylaws are so great. We are using them." So that's a good thing. And I'm totally open to sharing our bylaws with people, if they want to structure like that. The way we kind of found those bylaws was just through a community member who is really excited about worker-owned cooperatives, and so she turned us on to a few different samples, and we went from there. Yeah, but actually, I don't know. There are a lot of kind of hippie co-ops that aren't necessarily worker-owned co-ops. So I feel like we're a little bit trailblazing with the worker-owned aspect of our thing.
Yeah, very inspiring. I'm actually living in Sweden right now, but I'm from Iowa, and we'll return there. It's 2:30 in the morning, and but I was really excited about this topic, so I just decided to wake up and listen to what you had to say. My curiosity is, that makes me sound like a strange person, but anyway, really inspiring. I am curious what your experience is on a day-to-day basis or through this process in terms of what you see and hear and feel about the climate around this type of project in the Midwest. As a younger farmer in Southeast Iowa, this is like, I'm so excited to hear you talk about this, because it's along the lines of something that's, in my mind, has just been this dream. And there's so much momentum and weight behind these things you talked about in the beginning: big ag, access to land, ideologies around who has rights to the land, who should be farming, all these things. And I was just curious what your experience, since you're inside of and created this project, how it rolls out into the surrounding area, how people react to it, and what you think about in terms of like whether there's a tide that's kind of turning in this direction. Yeah, that's basically the question.
Cool. I don't necessarily have a good answer for it, except so my community is kind of, there are a lot of people in my community who are back to the lander types. So they came here in the 70s and 80s and made their homesteads, and I would say that those people, those elders, are my primary source of support, both financial, but also just kind of helping me out. So I'm lucky in that way, in this like corner of Northeast Iowa that's that's kind of hippy dippy. But I interface like fairly often with conventional farmers, and like as a woman and as a queer person, but mostly as a woman, it's kind of interesting to see how that interface works. And I think people are generally pretty cool about kind of the changing face of agriculture, although yeah, you mentioned like who's allowed to farm or who belongs on a farm. I remember going to a gas station once, and the woman in front of me in line knew me and asked me how the farm was, and I was like, great, it's great. And then the cashier asked me, oh, what do you farm? And I said, organic vegetables. And her face fell. And then she was like, but then she perked up and she was like, oh, okay, that's farming too, or something like that. So the kind of idea that farming is only one kind of thing is definitely pervasive, and I don't know how to chip away at that except by kind of actually chipping away at it with land access. Yeah, so I kind of stubbornly just kept my narrative going of like, we need food in this community. We need young people doing real work in this community. Let's make it happen. Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's do it. The other thing that I want to mention too is I was pretty convinced from the start that it was going to be important for me to have people to work with. So even though I farmed for 4 years on my own, hiring very part-time employees, I knew that like long term I wanted to be working with other people. And my ideas of who those other people were going to be definitely shifted over time. So I had some people that I really thought I was going to be farming with, I was going to be working with, and then things kind of fell apart there. And then Emily showed up, and she's not into the idea of intentional community in the way that I am, but she saw her chance to farm, to run her own farm with me. And so that's kind of the angle that she's approaching it from. And then incidentally, in order for us to be able to farm together, we have to kind of work together and be in community. So yeah, it's kind of interesting how different people's priorities and different things end up kind of working together. So yeah, I definitely still feel like a very small island in a kind of sea of conventional ag, but I'm lucky to have people around me who want to see more of those islands, and want to see, yeah, the regenerative ag flourish.
All right, any more questions? Okay, I think we're good. All right, thank you so much, Hannah. Thank you everyone else for joining. Thank you, Taylor, for that great question. And everyone have a wonderful evening.